Hello, everyone. Can you guys all hear me? This should be a little bit better. Just going to wait a minute and then start. How's everybody doing? You know, I got to be nerdy sometimes. These glasses really help. I've recently become quite blind. Well, not blind, but I just can't see as clear as I used to. It's a difference between like HD and 720. Hello, Evan. All right. Let's get started here. Okay, so a couple things to say. This is the first breakdown live of Beyond Tells on YouTube. I'm going to be doing two things. I'm going to be doing a Q&A once a week on YouTube and a Beyond Tells breakdown. I am literally going to call this like Poker Tells Variety Hour, and I'm going to be talking about a couple different dynamics. Sometimes I'll break down players. Sometimes I'll show you how we do research. Sometimes I'll do research in real time. I'm just going to do a wide range of things. Some of it will be really interesting to you. Some of you might like the breakdowns more than others, but I'm just sort of playing it by ear here and just doing a new one every week. Today, I'm going to do sort of a hybrid breakdown slash sort of overview or discussion of some themes and tells and sort of things in behavior. And really the goal here is to get people to open up their eyes to the power of behavior. I still am, I've talked about this a lot, but sort of sick and tired of other concepts or other technical approaches to poker getting a lot of recognition and then behavior being some sort of like mystic silliness or something like that. It's annoying. So I'm going to constantly do videos and constantly try to show breakdowns. I think I might eventually break down footage outside of Beyond Tells. So I might take some videos of well-known pros and hands that they've played and sort of discuss these themes and these dynamics in those hands, just to sort of show people that this is universally applicable. But anyway, sit back, enjoy. I'm going to watch through this player. I'm going to go over a couple things. And this is sort of free-form Q&A too. So if you have any questions regarding tells or anything that you want to sort of mention or say, like, please let me know. I know we have some Beyond Tells members here and some people that have no idea sort of what Beyond Tells is and sort of the background and system. So for those of you who don't know, we conducted the largest behavioral study ever on poker players, where we had people come in just like this gentleman right here, set them up, had them play games, recorded them from multiple angles, then spent about 3 years breaking down everything that they did and came up with a data-driven solution towards reading behavior and breaking down tells at the table. So really interesting. Lot of value here. Never thought there would be this much value to personally. But yeah, let's begin. So, okay. I am going to, what do I want to talk about today? I think we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown slash, let me just move this over so I can see what you guys are asking me. Little breakdown slash research session here. I wanted to explain a couple of things. For some of you, this might be review. For some of you, it'll be new information. So what do we find when we study behavior at the poker table? So like I said, we record all these players play, break down everything that they're doing. And there's a couple of central insights. The first insight is behavior is more useful than most players realize. So on a scale from 1 to 10, I would say that if you talk to like an average professional player or average live player or even average poker player, they'd probably list live reads and behavior to be something that exists at the end of the list. So they would say something along the lines of like, usually people fall in 3 categories. Some people are like, it's stupid, don't pay attention to behavior, don't waste your time. Some people are like, oh, like it's incredibly valuable. I'm able to break down players and I get really good reads. And what's interesting is players that speak like that often, I found that some of the people that are the biggest advocates of behavior at the table are actually using it incorrectly and are sort of falling victim to a lot of attribution biases and all these things. And then you have people that are in the middle. And this is what I think most intelligent poker players will say. It's like, what do you think about behavior? They'll go, there's certain times or certain things that I recognize or realize at the table. But for the most part, like it's not on the top of their list, right? And personally, I play a style and some of my students play a style of poker where behavior is really closely integrated and connected into how a person actually plays poker. So this is very different than how a typical poker player approaches behavior. And I wanted to just sort of explain the main reason why, right? So poker has evolved in such a way because of primarily language, right? So, all these terms to discuss what's going on, even simple language like 3-bet and 4-bet and 5-bet make the vernacular around poker. It creates this dynamic where people can share ideas and grow and so on and so forth. But behavior doesn't really have a defined language, right? So you might meet some person that goes, I knew they were bluffing. So I just knew they were bluffing. And it's like, well, how'd you know? I just know. I've played poker 10 years. I know. The problem with that is because we don't have some sort of empirical approach to approaching behavior at the table, and because we don't have a system or a method of approach that we can reconstruct and reuse and refine and work on, this skill set becomes like mystic. It's like some people got it and some people don't. And the reality is everybody can learn to use behavior actively at the table. Everybody's got different learning curves. Some of you are going to pick up on this stuff real quickly. Some of you are going to take a long time. But the thing that I've learned is that for the people that don't, it's easier to turn somebody who doesn't think tells have value into somebody who can actively read behavior and break it down than it is to turn somebody who thinks they're really good at reading behavior and they're not, which is fascinating, right? So, work with some people. I've played poker for 15, 20 years. I show them one hand of one player and they're like, oh, he's bluffing. I'm like, how the hell do you know that he's bluffing in one hand? And they can't really reverse engineer it, or they can't really break down the core reasons why. And that's a problem. And I'll expose you to some of this, maybe I'll have a structure for this. Start the first 10 minutes off talking about theory, then break it down. I don't know. I'll come up with something. But we've been doing a lot of experiments with behavior, doing a lot of stuff with machine learning. We're starting to get into a lot of stuff with machine learning and using it. And there's some really crazy shit I can do. I do believe that if you put a camera on a player, like heads up in a big event, and like I was looking at the behavior and relaying information back, I think it would be a considerable edge at a point of where like it'd be a huge edge in my opinion, especially against two players that have a similar understanding or similar approach to the game. So so I'm going to do this every week, open everybody's eyes slowly on YouTube. I guess the only thing that I'll ask from you is just like and subscribe. It helps the algorithms. I'm doing this to get the word out of Beyond Tells and just, grow our channel, grow our audience. So those little things, whenever you like and comment and all that stuff, it really makes a big difference for the growth of this specific channel. And one last thing, I am also going to be doing this for actual people outside of poker. So I'm doing research on my other company, the Nonverbal Group right now, and we're doing a large study in New York City starting in 4 weeks, where I'm going to do breakdowns of people that have nothing related to do to poker. So it's going to be breakdowns of social dynamics, breakdowns of why people's facial expressions lead to negative impressions in other people, why people are more likable than others, and just the whole gamut of human perception and behavior. So that'll be cool too, and I'll cue that and probably start that in about a month. So, live stuff is good. It's fun. It's easy for me because I just show up and talk as opposed to just having to write everything out and doing all those different things. All right, so today I'm going to talk about this from both practical purpose and a research purpose. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss research on poker players and then the practical application of poker players. I'm going to go through it from sort of like beginning to end. So first and foremost, when we first have a player here, I have a specific process that I go through depending on the breakdown. So like right now, you see this player, there's a couple things that have already been done. So right now we have essentially counted every single time or marked every single time he's blinked, marked every single time he's checked his cards, marked every single time he's bet, done some work on his smiles and timing of his smiles, and have all of his contextual action at the table. So if you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, you see all this? 2, 5, 10, and all this movement here, fold, all this. The reason why we have that is because it's all coded. So basically what happens is everybody has a single camera here on them, and then there's a camera above the table. And what we essentially do is every time somebody bets or every time somebody does something, we mark it. So like this person right here raises 15, see? Raise 15. This is because the data matches the time sync. And this allows us to do sort of an understanding of decision time tells and things related to the various patterns that go on. But what happens is first, everything gets coded, right? And usually when I do my breakdown, so I take different approaches. Sometimes I do them blind, which means I just literally just watch it. And I make my observations, I make my deductions, and then I see if they're right or wrong. This is more for my own sort of training and my own validation. I don't really necessarily do this when I'm doing research. When I'm doing research, usually I'll watch the first 15 to 20 minutes of this player, which is kind of what I'll do now. And I'll make certain core deductions and I'll basically like look at things further. So I'll watch this player play for 10 minutes and I'll see that their bet movement or their sort of card check movement looks like something. And then we'll drill down and look at every single instance that this player did this. This is a big problem with behavior and tells, right? Is that like if you watch tells or you watch someone talk about behavior on TV, they'll say some shit like, oh my God, look, see right there, he bet and that means da 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 da. But they don't see every single time this player bets. So it's highly biased. That's why I don't like books on poker tells. That's why I think a lot of information on poker tells is quite frankly, not nonsense. Anybody who's preaching higher observational skills at the poker table, it's a good thing. But to say one thing, X means Y, or to say that when a player does this, that means that is just the wrong way to approach behavior. And the way that we see that is because, I have every single time this player plays. So all of a sudden I see in hand 2, he does something and I'm like, oh my God, he's going to do that every time he bluffs. And then I look at hand 86, I look at hand 96, it does the same thing and he's top of his range, or he does the same thing and he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, right? So it's really important to have that validity and to be able to understand, okay, I have a read. It's not only correct right now in this second, it's correct over time, right? It's correct hand to hand and week to week and month to month. And that doesn't mean that a player's tells or a player's behavior is going to be consistent all the time. That's not what that means. It means that our approach to understanding behavior at the table is empirical. It's not based on sort of, oh, we know or we heard some good player tell us that this is the tell, or we have a gut instinct that this is what this means. There's a strong reason why we think a subset of behaviors means something, and we're confident enough in our process to use those behaviors to make an information-driven decision, okay? So an example of this is, and I'll show you examples of this as going forward. So it's hard, it's interesting. It's hard to talk about this because this is so inherently complex sometimes, right? So like right now, all right, let's watch the first 60 seconds together, okay? I'll show you. So a couple things about this player, right? A little bit of context. This is 2-5. This is the first hand he plays. This is session 4 of the second Beyond Tell study. This particular player plays two in 2 sessions, but this is his first time playing. And what you're going to find here is that this we cut for this. I got rid of all the hands he folds. So if he just folds and he doesn't actually play post flop, I get rid of it. And the reason why is, for analysis purposes and things like that, some of you are just going to go nuts if you have to see me scroll through when every time a player plays a hand. That being said, when we're doing analysis, is what we actually do. So we don't look at just every hand that they play. We look at every hand that the player folds also. And it's really important to be able to look back and forth at that dynamic. But for this, let's just look at hand 1. So he checks his cards and folds first hand, right? Now, that's around 20 seconds of information. From like a research perspective or from a pure data perspective, that probably creates somewhere in the neighborhood of like, I don't know, let's see, 20 seconds, 30 frames per second. That's 600 times, it's like 90 lines. So 6 times 9, it's like 5,400 lines of data in that first 20 seconds. If you use facial tracking, facial analysis, and then like qualitative movement data. So like 5,400 points of data points. This is insane, right? And what do we find of those 5,400 data points? Maybe 50, 60 are something useful. The rest of it is just noise. So most of the information at the table is just going to be noise. It's not going to actually be something that's tangible, that's useful. And there's different levels and ways that you use this information, right? So a higher level Beyond Tells type player should be watching this for the first 20 seconds and picking up some interesting things. A lower level Beyond Tells type player shouldn't be picking up anything at all. So let me sort of explain. So first things first is with Beyond Tells, we teach something called a base stack. And basically what that means is we are always trying to create context on what we are doing at the table, right? So we're always trying to have a good amount of information before we make a read. And what we found is that if we use 4 things, we can create greater context. So if we understand a player's experience, understand a player's mood, understand a player's baseline thought process, and overall generalization of movement and behavior, we can make better empirical decisions. So basically, for example, let's say if this player right here, right, if he is inexperienced and I see that in the first 15 minutes, first 20 minutes, I see he's an inexperienced player, how I'm going to process this player's movement and behavior is completely different, okay, than it's going to be if he's an experienced player. So if you talk about any tell or any behavior, it's really absolutely essential that you have this concept of experience. Also, mood is going to change behavior. We found that. So like I've seen players who have no observable tells. They're very controlled. They're very in the moment. They're very present. Then all of a sudden, bad beat 1, bad beat 2, then their systems go to complete shit. And for the next like 50 minutes, it's open season on tells and behavior. Right, so you need to understand that this is a shifting dynamic. This is something that ebbs and flows, just like poker, guys. It's no fucking different. That's why I hate people make it, right? All of a sudden, players playing solid for 10 hours, playing really good poker, then they start to get pissed off, they start to get frustrated, then what happens? They start opening their range. They start playing hands that they wouldn't normally play. They start taking lines that don't make sense. They start steaming off. Behavior is going to be connected and perpendicular to that same thought process. It's not going to be much different from that. And a lot of players try to treat it as different, and it's not. So first 20 seconds, first thing I'm doing is sort of understanding a little bit of their level of anxiety and comfort at the table. And the reason why is it helps me understand experience. It helps me compare that moment of understanding, and it compares that emotional consistency to spots later on. And also, it doesn't really matter people will say like, oh, like people can be anxious for other reasons. Maybe they're anxious for the camera. Yeah, if they're anxious, they're anxious. I don't really necessarily care why. I just want to have a baseline understanding of what they look like, right? So this guy seems pretty comfortable. I wouldn't say that there's any sort of specific behaviors that would identify that he's anxious or uncomfortable. His movement's fluid, facial expressions are relatively dynamic, and there's a lot of movement there. First thing I do know is, you'll see here, scratches is all noise, nothing to say. The first thing he does is takes his cards and moves them over to the RFID box. So we did Beyond Tells with RFID and without. So Beyond Tells 1 was manually entered, and Beyond Tells 2 we used RFID tech. Not that much of a difference in terms of what that does for poker or what that does for reads. In fact, I am going to definitely believe that people that use RFID is more likely to give off tells, especially in higher, important, like let's say WSOP final table or something like that, for players that don't have experience, but by that time they would have experience. So checks his cards, motions together, and folds. Looks relatively fine, and then we saw him with a genuine smile, genuine laugh. Right, so he's self-expressed. We know it's a genuine smile based on muscle actions to the left and right in the face and smile timing, which I talk about, right? So one of the defining criteria of a genuine smile is, well, 5 defining is opening of the mouth, raising of the cheeks right here, U-shaped curve, and then the wrinkles and folds to the lefts and rights of the eyes and wrinkles and folds below the eyes. Some people can fake genuine smiles, but most people can't. I mean, this is beyond the scope of this thing, but this is the thing I'm looking for, right? Like, because I want to look like what this gregarious, big, open, low regulation smile looks like, so I can pay attention to smiles when I'm watching him. You got to understand also, guys, like my behavioral approach to poker, it's a lot different than even the people that I train. I think that I'm probably using behavior more than anybody else in the world to make my decisions. I don't think anyone comes remotely close to. I mean, most people have a grounded theory, a grounded strategy, and they use behavior to dictate things. I mean, I play a very value-driven strategy, very tight side, and then the rest of my game is just all exploitations of behavior. And the reason why is obviously I think this is my biggest edge, and I've done more work on behavior than I think, and poker players than anybody else, period. And it's something that I find interesting, right? So I look at a player and I look at them as, all right, this person has a strategy. This is for all you listening. Like, this is what you want to create, an intellectual curiosity with poker, because that intellectual curiosity can supersede the frustrations and the angers that come from the volatility of winning and losing. So sometimes I'm like, all right, like I'm sitting here, I'm here to figure out these players' strategy. But more than that, I'm not only trying to figure out their strategy, I'm always trying to make the best decision. I'm trying to crack them behaviorally. I'm trying to do something that nobody else is doing. So, you sit down at a table, you go to Bellagio, you play like 10, 20, 40 or whatever. A lot of these people have solver work. A lot of these people are experienced pros. A lot of these players, understand how to construct a 4-bet range the right way, and they understand that this hand could be this and this guy. There's so many of that out there now. But there's not that many people that are going to look at their table and look around and approach it from a behavioral perspective the way that I'm approaching it. And it gives me sort of like a badge of honor and a badge of excitement that allows me to be like, yeah, you can smirk all you want about your optimal 3-bet strategy, but like I'm going to see clearly when you're marginal and when you're strong. Just give me a couple minutes. And I try to frame it as like a massive puzzle. And I'm doing that when so like a lot of people that have done this for me, I've made comments like, hey, Blake, like, how do you watch like hour after player? Or like, how do you pay attention for this long? And a lot of it is that intellectual curiosity and that excitement of like, I'm going to fucking crack you, right? I'm going to crack you. And sometimes I'm not able to, but I'll definitely get a couple people at the table. And that pride and that passion allows us to move forward. So it's just for standard for any of you who are playing poker, like it's not just about making the best decision, like add more layers to it. It's not just about making money. Add the fact that you want to be the most present. You want to be the best at the table. You want to be the most dynamic. Like add more layers. The more layers that you have, you'll find it's easier to play your A game and it's easier to get in a zone. I'm playing WSOP Poker Online next week. I'm going to really have to do a couple of things to get in the zone because, online is just, in my opinion, so boring compared to this. All right, so first hand he folds. genuine laughter. I've used him in a breakdown, but I haven't shown all these hands here. Okay, so, right, so this is what we call, for those of you who are new to this, what you just experienced is what we call string. Right, so in Beyond Tells, there's two kinds of, all right, so you ever watch read a body language book or anything like that? They'll constantly talk about this thing called clusters, right? So that behavior falls into clusters. And when you see somebody do this, and this, that means that they don't like you, or that means that they're angry, or whatever. And what we found at the table is that clusters are kind of useless. What's more important is strings, which is the order at which certain events happen and the speed between each of those events. And the really cool reason, and the fundamental reason why, is that poker is a game that decisions are based largely on some sort of process, right? So, right, a player looks at his cards or her cards and they say to themselves, all right, some of them have a sophisticated process, and they may not sit there at the table thinking, all right, in mid position, this is a hand that I'm going to be raising to 3.5 or 4. They're not thinking like that. They're just going to raise, right? But behind that is some sort of work, right? Which is why if you follow certain players, you'll see that their pre-flop movement looks very similar because they have such a well-defined pre-flop strategy. So you'll see this a lot in World Series of Poker, and you're playing with really good players, or you see this at bigger games where players, they move in very similar ways hand to hand, not because they're standardizing behavior, but because they know what they're going to do because they've worked on a strategy to refine and develop what they were going to do. And they spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours doing that, right? So in this particular instance, we see right off the bat evidence that this is probably not the case, right? So players, what is he, under the gun +1 in a 6 max game, raises to 15. Now, and the reason why I say that is there's properties to how a player raises, right? So, for example, if you talk to the standard player, a standard good poker player, and you ask them what happened here, say, listen, man, what happened here? They will tell you that a player opened to 15 in a 2-5 game under the gun +2. And then the second sort of discussion, I mean, anybody who's understands anything about poker is going to say something like, all right, what can we infer by this raise? Second hand this guy plays. First sort of question I would say is, does this player understand the range adjustments that are required with your opening strategy when you're playing 6 max versus full ring, right? That's kind of a lot of players will make that mistake. They'll play 6 max and they'll play it like they play full ring and they'll play too tight. Or they'll adjust the other way and they'll play just a god-awful amount of hands that they're not capable of playing because it's 6 max, right? So that's the first thing I'm thinking to myself. And why? It's because everybody has right now some sort of predefined range construction in their head about what they think players are doing, right? And the biggest mistake players make in poker, specifically amongst good players, is, if you've done a lot of work and you guys have sort of evaluated 6 max strategies and understand what hands you could open, what hands you could rebet, what hands you could do all these things with, you tend to project a little bit of that onto this player. So I've worked with players privately where I'm basically like, what do you think he has? And then they'll say their construction. And I'm like, I don't think this player knows that they can raise that hand in this spot. I think you're giving them a little bit too much credit, right? So usually there is some sort of projective process. And poker is a game of incomplete information, but we're always looking to start from some specific point, right? We want to have a specific point of where we jump off of, which is how we perceive pre-standard ranges, right? So some of you, if you play 1-2, and that's all you've played in your life, if you look at this player and you use 2-5, you're going to say, oh, maybe players in 2-5 are more aggressive, so therefore his range is a little bit wider. Or some of you who play a lot online and you apply the trends and themes of 200 NL to this game and you think that he's constructed like a bad 200 NL player, you're going to be dead off, right? So what I'm trying to do, or with behavior, instead of seeing just that, instead of seeing an opening to 15 and some sort of baseline understanding of what this player could potentially have, I see a lot more. And those of you who are in Beyond Tells and my students should see a lot more as well. So let me explain what I'm talking about here. So All right, so let's go back to the square one. Scratching his head means nothing. He's scratching his head. All right. All right, so first we have a brief hesitation before he actually bets. And then he drops and bets. So it's not a raise to 15. It's a raise to 15 with a slight hesitation. Then he goes back with his right hand and covers his cards and plays with his chips in his left hands and rechecks his cards. So we have a string of behaviors that allow us to better understand this player, not necessarily in this specific hand, but basically allows us to understand this player and gives us a starting point to notice a deviation in difference, right? So what we saw in this, if I were to have to make a sort of read on this, I would say that he is definitely not at the top of his range. And understand when I use language, I say his range, or I'll say the top of what the top of their perceived marginal range. So one of the big problems players make is that concept of projection, right? Like of taking information and getting it really wrong and saying like, oh, this player is extremely tight, or this player is raising X, Y, Z type of hands. And the reality is behavior is relative to the perception of that player. So what you'll find is that if this player, let's say this player had, everybody can agree that like kings plus are in the top of everybody's range, right? Like two best hands in poker. Most players aren't going to have trepidation or hesitations about playing kings or aces from any position, right? That's why we see that when players have kings plus, they tend to be relatively fluid in their execution. So it doesn't look like what we just saw. It looks like check their cards and an immediate raise. No hesitation, no double card check, none of that. Just no noise, clean execution, right? But you will find some other players who have a cleaner execution with pocket queens in a 4-bet spot because they know that's what's right, but they know they need to do that, versus some players who will actually look a little bit anxious and will look a little bit weird and off with a hand like queens or a hand like maybe ace-jack or ace-queen suited because they're not comfortable playing that hand because of a lack of knowledge or understanding about the game. So in this particular scenario, if I saw this player in the second hand have that level of string, which is basically what we just saw, I would say, all right, based on what we saw, I think that the double card check, so him checking his cards twice, which we've marked, I think 25,000 card checks by now, and you start to see very similar. You start to see basically that players are going to recheck cards that are just hard to remember. I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? Like aces, not hard to remember. So when you see rechecks that are condensed, so a player checks their cards and then like within 15 seconds, they recheck their cards again. But for the most part, we are likely to see not pairs and hands like, suited connectors, gappers, not connected hands. So offsuit hands and, ace jack, ace queen, ace 10, ace 9, ace that. You're very rarely likely to see like kings and aces. Of course, everybody's always like, what? There's a guy at my game that always checks his hands twice, Blake. So that's not, well, obviously, if the player's checking their cards every single time twice, it's not that person. Also, be careful, a new theme that has emerged, especially amongst you Europeans, if you're listening to me right now, is rechecking your cards before the flop. So players check their cards once, and then they check their cards before the flop, right? It's really, really important not to make that mistake and see that happen because players are relatively consistent with that sometimes, okay? So, 45 seconds in here, a couple things. I've got a player that is likely to connect his thought process to his pre-flop execution and hand strength. I've got a player that is relatively comfortable, seems to be pretty experienced in the sense that he's played enough poker that he's like not looking around and not knowing what to do or whatever. But I have a really good feeling about it. Now, this is how I work. everybody, and we teach this in Beyond Tells, right? You all have different thresholds. You all have different things to attack, different levels of aggression, different ways of approaching the game. For me, if I saw this behavior, even if it's the second hand, he's getting raised. It's just, there's no way he's not. This looks like weak. This looks like top of weak. If I'm in position, I'm pretty much raising a lot of the time any two cards. But there's the problem with Beyond Tells, and the reason why we make people apply for it. And I've been so like back and forth about this, right? Because I've been coaching poker for like, I don't know, 12, 13 years. And I really think the thing that makes school cards and Beyond Tells different is that like we sort of care about the path of our students. I interview people. I ask them like, is this right for you? Like we do a lot more than most people just like sell you the product. Like we tend to create vetting stages. And the reason why is you really technically should be able to at least be break even live without ever looking at behavior before you're starting to integrate this stuff. Like I feel like a lot of players are still so undereducated in this game that no matter how much behavior we add, they're still going to struggle, right? So that's why I'm always so make sure your strategy's aligned, make sure you understand what's going on first, make sure you have a dynamic approach to the game, and then start adding behavior. But the reality is I do believe that I can teach people to attack these trends and attack these norms without even being super competent poker players. It just takes a certain level of awareness and heightened attention that just most people don't have, which is why we don't do it. All right, so he raises, looks around. So what's interesting here is, all right, so this is where behavior becomes such a fucking mind-numbing thing. All right, so like right here, right, we have the moment where he bets. What is that at? He finishes, and this is how you can't see the numbers, but literally we will go frame by frame to get the number just right. Let's see. So it'll be counted when he drops it. Boom. So like 41 at 41 seconds, he executes his bet, and then there's this pausing from 41 to like. What happens? We see a flop at 101. So 41 to 101 is a 20-second period where this player has information that he's potentially giving off. And see, this is where the what I call like the dark arts, which is speech play and conversation, really come into play, right? So this is where I would start having a conversation with that player in that 20-second period and doing certain higher level things and higher levels approach. But one of the interesting things about this particular dynamic is like the question is this: you're at a table, right? You got 9 players that you're looking at. You can't watch every player at every time. You can't focus at every moment. You can't do it. So what do you got to do? You got to focus at a handful of players. So this is a period that it's weird because yes, there could be information in here. Like we could see an increase in concealment. We could see all these various things. You might have noticed a little patterns with his gaze directions. He looked left to right. He looked up, down. He started looking in different directions. His attention sort of waned. That could be something. But the reality is this isn't a high impact moment for us. Meaning there's not going to be a ton of information in a lot of players in between when a player executes the bet and when the player finishes it. And this is what drives me nuts. Like, especially on Twitter, there are so many poker players that run their mouths about behavior. Like, this is a tell, and this is a tell, and this is a tell. Yeah, anything could be a fucking tell. But the reality is if we're actually trying to apply this, you can't look at every player at every time. You don't have cameras at every player or replay everything. Everything could be a tell. But the whole point is efficiency. The whole point is that we look at the right players for the right times for the right reasons. And after analyzing so many damn players, it is very clear that the moments after a player executes, up until the point of the next event action, so up until the point of the flop or anything like that, isn't filled with a ton of information. And some players it is. It's, every once in a while it is, but for the most part it's not. So unless you're playing like heads up, you may not be able to task switch this much, right? So that's why you always have to make sure that you prioritize your level of attention. Now, This is a heads-up dynamic. So obviously, the second that this player is going to be I'm going to be looking at him. Now, I'm not going to be looking at him in a creepy way like this, like just staring into his eyes the whole time. I'm going to sort of be gauging his energy or looking at him outside of my peripheral. But also understand that when you're just looking around the table at various moments, you're not able to pick up everything. So it's all about efficiency. So if we were to have to break this down into efficiency, I will tell you this. The reaction to the flop or the reaction to a player's bet is going to be greater than the 21 seconds that we just saw, right? And if we're trying to be efficient, we want to prioritize and look where we want to look, right? So that's kind of, I'm going to just rant on tells. I'm coming out tell-wise. There's just so much, okay? 25 bet. So, okay, what happens here? So this is sort of how I think about behavior, and this is a little bit of my thought process. So if you talk to a really developed poker player, let's say the player in the in the big blind is a really developed player, the way that they think, and when I say developed, I mean like a more modern approach to poker, they're just instantly going to know what they're going to do with their range in this spot a large percentage of the time. And a good player, it's going to be relatively defaulted. So sometimes they'll make changes and deviations, but they technically shouldn't in hand two. This is hand two. They're not knowing a lot of information about their player. They're not understanding the depth of that, especially if they're not paying attention to behavior. So they know that they're going to be check calling or they're going to be check folding or whatever they're going to do like 90% of the time, or once in a while they'll make a blunder or they'll deviate from that. And sort of the way I look at poker and the way that I look at what's going on, my approach is very separated from that. So my approach is very in the moment, which I've talked to a lot of players. Somebody said, so Blake is like in the top 10 poker players in the world right now. I'm probably not even in the top 500. I'm probably not even in the top 1,000 at this point. I'm a little bit rusty. And also you have to understand that, like, you know, for me personally, like when I'm talking about this as a discipline, you know, I feel like I have to get pretty, not lucky, but pretty fortunate in today's games, because there's players that from a strategic perspective are just vastly superior to me, or just way ahead of me in terms of like how they think about the game and how often they think about the game, right? So there's just so much information that they're juggling. And what I need to make sure is that my information is able to pierce theirs in a way that allows me to play a strategy against them. And I have played really good, exceptional poker players that just don't give me anything. And I have to revert to just a very tight strategy. And the reality is my game has suffered in a lot of ways because I only feel comfortable playing if I have behavior. If I'm looking at somebody, like I'm not that great online. I'm playing WSOP online. Like I understand basic shit, but like I'm constantly asking like Matt or Coach Dom or Coach Seabass, like the people that work for me and work with me, like what would you do here? Right. So like I'll post to Seabass, you know, who's probably, Seabass is just great at breaking down hands, and I'll ask him questions and he'll like challenge me. And I struggle with what's the default answer because I'm so doing what I'm about to explain to you, which essentially is this. I'm thinking to myself, all right, this player right now, first and foremost, I wouldn't think that he has an adjusted 3-bet strategy. So when I say that he opened, I'd probably say that he's on the top of what he perceived. Like I said, he's on top of his range. But I'd rule out and I'd say he never has kings plus in this spot. So I'd think that the type of hands that this player would likely to have based on the behavior that I saw are hands like ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, blah, 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 blah. And I build out that range for what I think this player has. Okay. That's the first sort of statement. And then the second statement is this. Given the fact that, I would have, let's say I checked too. I say to myself, how am I going to get this player to fold? Because my game and my approach to poker, and I'll be honest with you guys, like I went through a little bit of a period, I'd say around like 13 or 14 months ago, where I felt like, I was like, fuck, like, the game has like passed me by. Like I'm coaching some players and they're like they're more sophisticated than I am when it comes to their understanding of the game. And I sort of wrestled with this for a while, and I was like, all right, so like I started working on some bigger theory stuff, started doing some solver stuff, so I'm doing all this stuff. And like, I started to understand that like, it's taking me away from how I play poker. It's taking me away from my edge. Like, you ever talk to some of these people? Like, I've had the opportunity to, just discuss poker with so many people. And some of them are just like raw intellectual savages. Like, these people are like, Ferraris that are fine-tuned for poker. And when they spit out, like, it's like, and it's just crazy. And it's like, I'm not going to outdo that, because that's not what I do. But I can do that on a behavioral level. I can do that on an emotional intelligence level. I can do that on a conversational level. I can do that on a composure level. I can do that on a psychological level. So that's where my edge comes from. It's not coming from that. And I think one of the big problems with poker players today specifically is people don't develop a sense of poker identity. People try to copy other people play. People constantly feel that they're inferior because they hear other players play it, think about the game at a higher level. And they're unable to play their game because they're so afraid that they're not playing correct. And how I say this is, listen, Liz, I have behavioral information that I have a lot of confidence in. I have a good understanding of if this player is going to fold, and I'm going to choose my fucking line. I'm going to take my line. And if you want to critique that, if you want to do that, like, fine, right? Like, and it's sort of, this is my approach to poker. And I really honestly, like, the thing that really helped me, I guess, is like working with top players. Like, I have an opportunity working with a handful of like really world-class players in this stuff, and like seeing how they react and seeing how they respond and seeing how they integrate my information. It was like, all right, it was a little bit of an like, okay, I know what I'm doing. But the guys, it's always going to come up in poker. Just, poker players don't talk about it. I think you're always, if you're not questioning your game, if you don't feel like poker has passed you by at certain points, if you don't feel like you've slowed down or you've not kept your game sharp, you're not playing world-class poker. You're just kidding yourself. Like, it would be irresponsible for me to say that I'm as good as I've ever been right now when I haven't played poker in like 5 months. I came to Vegas thinking I was going to play, and all of a sudden not. So just so you conceptually understand, I think a lot of players need to hear that pep talk, and not a lot of people say that. So yeah, but this is what I mean by the mix mash of strategy and behavior. So right now, from a strategic perspective, yeah, of course, there's certain hands that I should never be calling with. There's certain hands that I should, never be calling, checking turn, and then bombing river with. But a lot of what I'm doing is just feeling it out. And what I mean by feeling it out, I'll sort of explain it in this hand, right? So he's looking at me after he bets and he just folds. So let's say, for example, let's put together a situation. Let's say, I'll be honest with you, for the most part, using a system that Steve Catterson, another one of our coaches, created, which is just this really cool system for classifying board textures as plus, negative, or neutral. I use that a lot with behavior. So what it basically is you view board textures as positive, negative, or neutral based on the aggressor. All right. So based on the preflop aggressor. So what I would say is, like, this is a neutral board, or this is a positive board, or this is a plus board, or this is a negative board for this guy. And usually what ends up happening is, if I'm in the player on the big blind, I already know what I'm doing on most boards regardless. So I'm just looking at his behavior, and like, I'll probably in this instance, like, I'd probably do a quick check. And when he bet 25, I'd probably do a very quick cavalier snap style call. So basically what it looks like is, like, when you bet 25 and someone just calls so quickly, you're like, what the hell? That's probably what I would do here. And basically this is sort of like a stand of like, I'm not going away right now. I know you're betting like 100% of your range on this board, and I don't think you've connected that much, so I'm willing to play. And usually what I'll do is I'll take the temperament of this player and see how he changes between the flop and the turn. And usually what will happen with a lot of recreational players is, everybody, the game has evolved right now. The game has developed to a point of where a lot of players are going to, open pre-flop because of some sort of chart and doing that correctly, and then sort of betting 100% of flops, and then getting a little bit timid on turn and river, just like it's always been, right? But what I'll be able to do is source the difference in the way this player is betting and their movement and how they bet and why they bet. And I'll use that information to sort of make a decision on if I thought that they've improved or not. So I'll often call with like random bullshit hands and then sort of see. And then if I see on the turn some sort of change, or I see if they're the way that they bet, and I mean the way in the order, so there's no hesitation, it's clean, it's fluid, it's whatever, I'll sort of take it that way. So a lot of what I do is just sort of feeling it out. And I've worked with some world-class players that also feel it out, but they don't have operational reasons on why they're feeling it out, right? They just sort of like conceptually feel it out. And the problem with that is they don't have data, or they don't have a language to define what they're doing. So what I'll say is, all right, there was a big difference between the way this player bet pre-flop and on the turn. I think that turn doesn't connect with their range at all. And I think this is the kind of player that is likely to bet river and then all of a sudden blah, 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 blah. And then I'll integrate that and I'll attack that, right? And every once in a while, like, I'm fucking brutally wrong. And it's like, oops. And usually that comes up when I'm doing this stuff too quickly and I'm not following my process and I'm not focusing it. But if you see me sitting there and I'm like playing poker and I'm like playing seriously, like I'm playing like I don't mean to, like, I've tried so hard to like sit down at any table and play seriously, but I just have a hard time taking seriously. Like if I'm playing 2-5 or 5-10 or whatever, even higher, you see me like looking at somebody, this is kind of like what I'm doing. This is kind of like what I'm thinking about. And this is also what some of our members are thinking about, some of our higher level players at. And really what you want to do, and the reason why I'm trying to sort of make these videos and show behavior at this level, is you want to take your style of poker and the way you approach the game, assuming it is profitable, right? So assuming it works and assuming you are a profitable player, which a lot of players aren't. But let's say assume you are. And you want to take this pieces of behavioral information and you want to integrate it usually in the spots where you deviate from the norm. So for example, a lot of players right now will like pull up some like fucking range chart and then they'll look at it and they'll start to play it and they'll be like, why am I not winning? And I'm like, because I mean, you can open up 20% of hands from every position and you don't know how to play poker. Like this game is so interconnected that it's difficult to do that, right? So let's say, for example, you know that you could sort of 3-bet suited connectors or gap connectors or something like that. You know that's something you could do at this stack depth against this player and in this dynamic. Let's say that's fine. But like you're a little bit apprehensive about it, or you're concerned about your role or whatever. What I would tell you to do is I'd tell you to look for behavioral moments where you think players aren't strong, or you think that players are sort of deviating from, or I'm not deviating. You look players that, are weak. Like they're checking their cards twice, or they're having some sort of recheck or something like that. And you use that opportunity to step out of your comfort zone with a range of hands that you normally wouldn't play. And the reason why I'm saying that is it's kind of like really just, it's just using behavior to increase the equity behind like a semi-bluff. Like it's all you're really doing, right? Like you're saying, okay, like this 9-7 has some value, right? But also, see, the thing where it gets comprehensive, and the reason why a lot of you need to really understand and do some range on range work is because when you start to understand how to use behaviors to narrow a range, it starts to like fundamentally change how you play against a player's range because of behaviors, right? So like if you're playing against a player and you're thinking about range on range, you say, okay, this player has this subset of hands. They have this wide subset of hands. And like my hand has this much equity against that range. But if you start to really understand behavior, you can say, okay, like I don't think he has this portion of his range. He has this portion of his range. Therefore, I have a lot more equity, or actually have a lot less equity. So I should be folding or raising in this spot. And that's why like doing like you call it solver work, or work with a hand range calculator, or work with any of that stuff is so important, because it allows you to understand that sort of macro to micro level of adjustment. And it's something that a lot of players just don't have or just don't do. And it's absolutely fundamental, and it's important. So I would definitely look for that. And I would definitely start to identify that when you're doing that. So ladies, see, this is the thing. I don't know what to do in these things. You gotta tell me. So is this free form? You like this? I mean, I got a minute and 13 seconds and it's fucking 4:23. It's already 53 minutes into it. But I just want to do this. Like, if I try to make this too produced and it becomes too much work for me, and then I don't want to do it, and I don't want to have the passion. And that's why, like this guy said, this dude pops up like once a year. I mean, that's a little bit wrong. I pop up more than that, and I coach a lot more than that. But on YouTube, yes, you're correct. So this free flow style allows me to produce more content, but it's not so in boxes. So yeah, I appreciate if you like this sort of format, but let's keep watching. Also, like, this is the stuff that I look at. Like, so this guy's got squinting type behavior. You see top half of his face. There's a lot of animation here. He squints a lot. Reason why it's important is a lot of players tend to do that. And I use that for a wide range of things, and I'll talk about that later. All right, so this is what we have. All right, so this gives us a little bit of understanding into this player's skill. Personally, this player has gotten a lot better over the years. This is quite a long time ago. But you know, we see what we call a cavalier call, and a cavalier call is when a player just sort of cavalier in a very sort of loose style just calls, right? So he limps under the gun in a 6-max game. Now, this is what you ask yourself. You know, I mean, how many players are going to discuss, you know, limping under the gun is a strategy? I mean, honestly, the first person that I've ever heard of talk about this was Christian Soto. So Soto over at Solve for Why, he wrote an article. I don't know, this must have been a long time ago. And he's talking about, you know, he was talking about the dynamics about the fact that in poker, you can raise, you can call, you can do all these different things. And by just playing a fold or raise strategy and not adding limps into your game, you become less predictable. Blah, blah. It was a really good article. It's a really good conceptual thing. But like most players, when they limp, they're just not going to be good. Okay. Like most players aren't. Every once in a while, if you see some like European looking German dude at a WSOP table and they start limping, they probably have done work on why they should limp, and it's probably part of their comprehensive strategy. But for the most part, you know, your 1-2-2-5 players limp under the gun, they tend to be bad. And the way that he did this and the dynamic that he did this in, it sort of helps me suggest that. He calls, doesn't pay that much attention. Okay, now this is another thing that players do. They lift their cards off the table right here. There's been something interesting I've seen. I've seen players that have done that where they lift their cards off the table with strong hands, and then they lift their cards off the table. I'm sorry, they don't lift their cards off the table with hands at the top of their range. Let's say it's like, you know, kings plus, ace king suited, ace king suited plus. See, this is why it's been a while talking about poker. Kings, it's funny because I'm teaching classes on nonverbal behavior, and I keep saying in the videos, like, terms like range, like they have a range of behaviors, or I keep saying like a lot of players instead of a lot of people. And now that I'm talking about poker a lot again, I'm like, you know, not making sense with saying ace king suited plus. Anyways, so like let's say ace queen suited plus and like queens plus, they'll never lift their cards off the table. Why? Because of the fact that their cards are good and they want to protect them. So they tend to do this with more marginal hands. So the fact that I saw this player limp under the gun and then lift his cards off the table, and the first time he did it and the second time he did, would support the thesis that in this particular dynamic or in this particular hand, he does have a hand that he perceives to be marginal. Now, so this is a dynamic. Like let's say, I won't give you too much of my strategy, but let's say like the button raises, like if I'm in the blinds, I'm probably raising like, I don't know, 99% of the time, or attacking that. Or if the button calls or two players calls, I'm just going to proceed that there are a lot of them are marginal and just take that opportunity to take a stab at it. And then what's cool here is when a player shows this sort of marginal behavior pre-flop, what we're looking for is like, again, understanding what that range looks like pre-flop and then connecting it to what their what the flop looks like. So like, all right, if we take the hands that this player perceives to be marginal, how does it do on a king 8-4 board? You can start to think of, how they potentially connect. Like, all right, we're not worried about a hand like, ace king, king queen, king jack. I don't even think king 10 at this point. Like, we're not worried about a lot of these hands. Are we worried about a hand like, pocket fours? Is he limping pocket the fours? Or looking pocket? So you can start to think about how you construct ranges, or how you think a player constructs ranges to connect to the board. I mean, for the most part, when he checks here, I would just bet. This is just like a instant checks that a lot of players don't take enough advantage of. This is one of my favorite things. When player checks flop, looks sort of timid, turn comes a blank that's not likely to connect with anything that they have. So you decide to bet. They call, and then players check river and give up. It's like, well, just continue the logic. Why are you stopping? And he mucks. Oh, jack 10. All right, so this guy limps under the gun. I don't think you were supposed to see that, though. Whatever. He limps under the gun with jack 10. So this is interesting, right? So, like, if this is how he thinks about the game, I mean, he's probably not he's not playing, or he doesn't understand how to play what poker's perception of marginal hands are. And so a lot of players will treat marginal hands still in today's game like they don't have value unless they flop well, which is just, you can't play them like that. Like, you can't play a hand like jack 10, and the only way you plan to continue is if you flop like 8-9, a9 queen, or jack 10-3. Like, you just can't play it like that. You have to understand how to extract value in other ways to create situational value, and that's kind of sort of what behavior helps you do. So, like, after these two hands, and after I've seen the way these two hands played, my current understanding of this player's thought process would be sort of devalued. I wouldn't consider this player to be like a well-constructive, deeper thinking type of player. I would think them to be just relatively weak and play like, I mean, the really cool benefit I have from live players, I talk to so many players, I coach so many damn players, that like I start to really see, like, I put players in these weird buckets. Like, this is the kind of player, like, right now that I believe that, like, is just not confident in their pre-flop construction, or hasn't done enough work in their pre-flop behaviors. And this is the reasons why they do things like that. Like, they limp under the gun. And because of that, it'll allow me to take a lot more advantage of their actual process of the way that they think. So yeah, 2 minutes and 16 seconds in and an hour in. It's pretty crazy. Okay, so first of all, I just want to do a brief Q&A for the next 10 minutes. And I think I'm going to have to start making these in the future more like 90 minutes or 2 hours if I have the energy for it. I think I could do that. But do you have any general questions about this player, general questions about behavior? Please ask now. So no one has a freaking question? What the hell, people? Andy Watson, go to beyondtells.com/training and finish that whole first week of free information, and it goes into that. I like that, Brent. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to continue this player next week because we've only got a bunch of, we only got 2 minutes and 16 things, I'll continue this player. That's what I'll do. I'll keep continuing it. It's a good idea. Just spend like 3 sessions on one player, break it down, go over this. All right, I'll answer 3 questions, and I'm going to go over one other thing, and then I'm going to call it. Do you think the different recreational players versus tournament players? So first of all, there's too much of an emphasis that because a player is experienced or because a player is a good poker player that they don't have tells. I have seen the best players at the biggest stages in poker do the same exact things that a 1-2 player does. These are themes of human behavior, cognitive processing, the whole concept of like, oh, I've been playing poker for 30 years. I've been playing the highest stakes. I don't show emotion. Doesn't matter. Tells are not about emotion. They're about a cognitive process and they're about behaviors that are linked to a cognitive process. So even if you don't experience any emotion at all, it doesn't make a fucking difference. You still have tells. So I think that it's not about if a player has tells or not. The only reason that we're focused on if a player is experienced or not experienced is really because of the fact that we're trying to understand their construction and how they're thinking about hands and how they're thinking about ranges and how that is connected to their behaviors. That's why we're so focused on experience, not because different players or different experience type of players have different tells. So good question. Oh, that's a good question, Clint. Clint said, do benzodiazepines remove tells? So for those of you who don't know, benzodiazepines are essentially muscle relaxants that were built after barbiturates. But long story short, like Xanax, Valium, all that. I would think that benzodiazepines do reduce behavioral increases in emotionality, almost definitely. But this there's no way in hell that if you're on if you have anxiety and you're on a low level of benzodiazepines or whatever, and you're functional, it's a different thing. But like if you're taking benzodiazepines to reduce tells, the cognitive impairment that you get from that is not good. Don't get me started on this concept, because like I have this big thing that I think a lot of players suffer from social anxiety. So a lot of players like smoke weed and do all these things to reduce anxiety, and the reduction in anxiety increases cognitive performance. So they think that the weed is a cognitive enhancer, but it's not. It's just because of the reduction of anxiety. But you could like work on that with diet and CBT and a bunch of other things. That's a complicated. Get me down a rabbit hole, Clint. What the hell? Oh my God, a lot of questions. All right, I'm gonna ignore some because they're longer, and if I can give a quick answer, I'll give it. That's a good. Light on Stillwater says, when V says, what means villain, or V for vendetta, I'm all in versus all in, is there a difference? I think that the way and nature that people have spoken about vocal tells and like word usage has been grossly overestimated, meaning people think that there are these big changes and big differences because a player says a certain string of words. And I really think it's a function of how they're saying it more than what they're saying it. However, I have seen some players fall into those type of patterns. But like, if you want to think about it on a global scale, I don't think there's much difference when people saying I'm all in versus all in. However, there might be a big difference if they say something like, I'm all in versus like all in. And they're trying to over or exemplify behavior, but it has a lot to do. So you want to process language from this weird approach where you want to first identify how social or extroverted or socially competent a player is. Because if a player is like really socially competent, like if you take a player like Daniel Negreanu and you're trying to figure out like, well, he's just Daniel Negreanu. He's like freaking social as hell. He's like a social guy. So it's like, it's hard to see that because they're able to do that. Like, I know I can be in very high stress moments. Like I could be in like a really stressful spot and I can talk and you won't see shit in me. You won't see my handshake. I'll seem fine. Why? Because I'm comfortable talking in those high stress moments. Right. So it's easy to sort of like calibrate for that. It's a longer discussion, but don't pay that much attention to that. Pay more attention to the hands and stuff like that. Stuart said, how about observations when he is raking in a pot that maybe he had nothing, which I know when I see bet everyone folds, I have nothing. I wonder what I'm giving away when I rake. The stupid, honestly, I've really looked at over and over and over again, like what it means when a player is raking in a pot and like what that actually is. But the reality is I haven't really found anything, so I don't want to comment about it. Like I have hunches, but like I haven't found anything really concrete. Like sometimes it's obvious, like when a bad player is like, like but most players don't do that. Most players just stack it. Sometimes you see little smirks and things like that, but I haven't found anything that I can give you a structured way for approaching that. Do you have any players wearing sunglasses? I find players wearing sunglasses a little harder to read. Jason, I do. I have 3 or 4 players, and actually they're easier to read. I have a video of that on this channel somewhere. If you scroll down, I explain why. Yeah, we'll continue with him, King Sight, and thank you for your kind words. David said, what's most commonly overlooked tell for recreational players? I would probably say, can you shut the door? Shut the door. I would probably say it'd have to be card apex. So go to beyondtells.com/training. It's like video 4 or 5. I talk about the card apex. That's supposed to be the most important. That's a really good question, Steven. Steven said, do you use range first, then tells, or tells first? I use behavior to help. I have a pre-fault. I do this in seconds. So like I look at somebody in 15 seconds and I'm like, all right, this is what this player's range is. But I'm using behavior to inform that. So this is the answer. It's the same time. But my understanding of range construction and how players construct ranges, the work has been done for that beforehand. Peter, great question. Are throwing false tells worth training for and using? No, not until you get really, really good at this skill set. No. Oh, Carlos, haven't seen you in a long time. Based on his tells and appearance, I would make a note about this player that he usually needs a snack after 45 minutes of play. Hey, Blake, why would you think he needs a snack? He might. It's very possible. Do you know him or something? In the hand before the Jack 10, is there any merit to the way he mucked his card when the hand was over? That's what I tried to look at. I haven't found anything really consistent with that. I've been looking for themes. I have my own theories and stuff, but it's not like anything that I can actually like prove. So I don't say it. Do you have any research on online tells? Unfortunately, no. I don't think that would be hard to do. I don't know if hand histories have timestamps, but you could do pretty big data on hand stamps, and it wouldn't take that much time. All right, there's one other thing I want to talk about. So, but these are all great questions. Thank you, guys. So what I want to do is... So today is an interesting day. Let me just share this with you. Add scenes. Window capture. No. All this, I don't know how these streamers do it, man, with all this OBS and shit, all this technology. It's crazy. Any of you stream, like do any of that? All right, I think I do it. Add a new source. Cool. I'm like next level right now. All right. So for those of you who know me, I don't really like plug things often, but I want to tell you a brief story and talk about this book that was just released. So for those of you who don't know, Maria, she just released a book called The Biggest Bluff, right? And I want to tell you sort of a brief story. So Maria is like a real student of human behavior. She wrote 2 books. She wrote one on Sherlock Holmes, which those of you who know, well, it's not Sherlock Holmes. It's basically how to think or adopt mental frameworks that was used in Sherlock Holmes in your life and integrate it. And she's just like a true student of human behavior. And when I found out she was writing a book about poker players, I got really excited because, there really isn't any science writers that approach poker. There's been articles and stuff like that, but she really is like a hardcore science writer. She's a PhD in psychology. She's written 2 books, and I was like, I've read both of her books. I liked her post books. And I reached out to her. I met up with her in Brooklyn. This must have been like a year and 4 months ago or something like that. And one of the coolest things about her is when we started talking about poker, like I was expecting her to have a conversation with me about poker, but from a writer's like outside perspective. And those of you who don't know, if you've ever talked to writers, they'll talk to you and they'll sort of extract all the information because they're trying to write something. And when I talked to Maria, she was like, I'm like, damn, she's actually really learning how to play poker. Like, she was discussing ranges with me, and she was getting coached by some of the best players in the world. And she was just like really, really, really like getting into poker. And I was like, oh shit, like she's not fucking around. She's writing a book about poker, but she looks like she just wants to like play poker and go pro. And I was really excited about this. And I was like, oh, this book's going to be great. And then, so about like 8 or 9 months ago, I am sitting, I think it was the shootout event in last year's WSOP. I'm sitting down here and I sit at my table and I turn to the right, and like a table over, I see Maria at the table. And like I walk up to her and I was like, hi, Maria. And she just like looks at me back. And it was so funny because it was, do you know that scene in Star Wars when like Darth Vader like rises and they become Darth Vader, and they're like, I feel like her journey as a poker player, like, she's won and she's done good, but like that was the moment where in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, she's like really a poker player. And the reason why is she was like, she had that delicate balance of being so like tired and exhausted from playing like a really serious WSOP schedule. Like she played back-to-back events, but still having the excitement and enthusiasm that we get that only a real true poker player could actually understand. And I found it so cool that somebody like sort of came into the community and really dedicated herself to the game, really integrated herself, and didn't just write a book about it, but she fucking walked the walk, right? So she wrote a book, but she also became a competent poker player that could probably beat most of the people on this webinar. And I think that's really special and that's really cool. So I really wanted to promote her book here. I'm going to write a long email about it and send it out. I'm going to do a webinar about this book. So for those of you who are going to read it, I'm going to sort of extract tidbits and things that we're going to discuss. And I'm going to offer something, I don't know, I think like $100 credit to those of you, to any of our courses who buy this book. So you just got to send me the receipt and a picture with it. I'll give you $100 credit to anything. And also, you got to understand, guys, you want to move this book. You want to move this book. You want to recommend this book. You want to tell all people about this book. And the reason why is because I believe her audience and her sort of intellectual approach to poker is going to strike a chord with the kind of people that we want in the game, right? We want people that have money, that are going to take this game as a passion, that are going to really take it seriously. And I believe that this book can create those kinds of players, right? So it's going to be great. And I don't promote things. I don't promote anything else but my own stuff. So this is sort of rare for me, but I strongly recommend you all purchase this book. It's, it's really helpful if you do it this week, because then it helps the New York Times bestseller rankings. So please make sure you do that. And please make sure, you get the biggest bluff. Send me a receipt, send me a picture of it, and I'll make sure we take care of you as well. All right. So thank you so much, guys, for doing this. I'm going to do another one. I think I'm going to do them every either Monday or Tuesday. I'll make a choice this week and I'll stick to it. I'll do these for the foreseeing future. I had a lot of fun today. I'm not going to prep. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to come up to this and do this. But thanks so much. Any suggestions, shoot me an email. For those of you who want more informed training, beyondtells.com/training. Check it out. All right. Much love, guys.